Hi everybody, I just watched the episode 5 of Game of Thrones and I'm here to talk about it. So let's start with the good things of the episode, which are not a lot. In this episode, the director did a really good job. In fact, visually it's one of the best episodes of whole Game of Thrones. The director of this episode, Saposnik, is the director of the Battle of the Bastards and Hardom. One of the best shots of this episode is when Arya is running through the city and she sees all the people that are dying, and it's a really interesting scene visually. Another thing that I liked about this episode is the fact that the war is always bad, even if the good guys are winning. In fact, the war quickly became a massacre. I think that it has always been portrayed in this show, the fact that war is a bad thing. One of the only things that are interesting of this last season is Daenerys being a negative character. In fact, I think that the concept of it is really interesting, but how it was portrayed in this show wasn't really good. In fact, it happened too quickly, and also it wasn't shown in a good way, I think. The only really good dialogue that I enjoyed was the one between Tyrion and Jaime. It's a good goodbye, and we can see that Tyrion returns the favor that Jaime did in the fourth season, and I think that this dialogue is well written, but Jaime isn't anymore the character that we saw in the last seven seasons. In fact, in this episode, he became the character that was at the beginning of Game of Thrones, and I think that it's really disappointing. So let's talk about the bad things of this episode, which are a lot. So I want to talk about the death of Varys, which I think that was bad as shown in this episode. In fact, Tyrion and Jon should have stopped Daenerys. In fact, Tyrion knows that Jon is a better king than Daenerys. And Jon is the son of Ned Stark, a man with honor that always defended the truth. So it doesn't make sense. The second thing that I want to talk about are the characters. In fact, most of the characters returned back at the beginning of this show, so their narrative in seven seasons are useless. A lot of them didn't learn nothing from what they saw and did. An example of this is obviously Jaime, as I said before. The fact that he returns with Cersei is really a nonsense. In fact, we saw him with Brienne. I didn't like that choice, but at least it was an evolution of Jaime. But in this episode, he simply forgot everything and died with Cersei, that in this episode looks like a positive character when she dies, because the bad one is Daenerys, not her. Everything that she did in 8 seasons was not punished, and it's one of the worst thing that this show did in this episode. Everything that we saw in these 8 seasons are useless. For example, the death of Ned Stark, the death of Robb, the trial of Tyrion, the death of Jon, the White Walkers, and Cersei being the last enemy. All these things are useless because none of the characters learned anything from what happened, and I think that this is the worst thing that this episode did, and also the fact that this episode betrays the logic of the previous episodes. It's bad. For example, Drogon and Daenerys destroy the Iron Fleet and all of the Scorpions, while in the previous episode we saw that Daenerys was in danger, but now she destroys everything. And also the fact that somehow the army of Daenerys doesn't look weaker. In fact, in this episode we didn't see a battle, we only saw a massacre. All of this is an insult to the logic and to the people that watch Game of Thrones. And I think that this episode is, as I said before, visually great. But if you have to put it in the context of Game of Thrones and its logic, it's one of the worst episodes of the show. So this is my opinion, and I know that a lot of people enjoyed this episode, and I respect that. If you liked this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I hope that the last episode is a great conclusion of this story, but I'm not so confident. So, ciao.